Thank you so much, Ohad, always for being there, for welcoming me, for saying nice things about me, Baruch Hashem. And thank you to all of you for coming back to School Mitzvot. We are jumping into part 2 of last week's class, but part 3 of our Kashrut class. And the reason I say part 2 of last week's class is because these halachot that we are going to study today are a natural byproduct, or they come from these verses that we focused on last week in the context of Tevilat Kelim. And this week we're going to focus on that context of Hekhsher Kelim. Now there are those who say Haksharat Kelim. Rav Peretz prefers the term Hekhsher Kelim, and therefore I use it as well. If you look at footnote 1 at the bottom, I copied from my 3rd edition of Yehi Shalom, in which I will use this word sometimes of kosher. And we know that the word kosher is not really a word. The word is kasher. As it seems that Eastern European Jews transliterated the word kasher with a kamatz that goes oh, so it became a kosher, and then kosher was spelled K-O-S-H, and then kosher became kosher. And today, if you say kasher to somebody, many people don't even know what you're talking about. The same is true with lehachshir. So I would tell somebody the way lehachshir, that kli, or the way to do a hekhsher on that kli, rather what they'll prefer me to say is kashering. So please don't get offended by the grammatical incorrectness of that word. Rather, I'm preferring to use a term that many people may understand, even though it may not have originated with us. As Ohad mentioned, I will stay here as long as necessary to take questions at the end. If you have something pressing that you can't get forward with without, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and ask. But let's begin learning. Why wait? So we are on page 1 of the source sheet. And I'll review again the verses that we mentioned last week. So this is in the context of Aharon HaKohen, Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, taking the Jewish people out to war. Vayomer Elazar HaKohen el anshe hatzava. Elazar, the Kohen, tells the men of the army, Habayim lemilchama, who are getting ready for war, Zot chukat haTorah. This is the law of the Torah. Asher tziva Adonai et Moshe, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has commanded Moshe. Ach et hazahav v'et hakesef et hanechoshet et habarzel et habedil v'et haofaret. And mentions here 6 types of metals, which we learned already last time. That 6 types of metals are just a generic term for metal. So we're going to understand them that it means all metal. Kol davar asher yavo va'esh, anything that was used in fire, ta'aviru va'esh v'taher, will come through fire and now will be permissible for use. Ach b'mei nida itchata, but it must be purified first with waters of nida. We already discussed last time that there are 2 interpretations of that, though our chachamim understand this in terms of halacha to mean that it has to go through a mikveh as well. V'chol asher lo yavo b'esh, and anything that is not used in fire, it's used in heat but not fire, taviru b'mayim, will go through water. V'chibastem bigdechem b'yom hashvi'i utartem, and you will cleanse your clothing and wash them on the 7th day and you'll become clean. V'achar tavo lamachaneh, and then you can return back to the camp. So, whereas last week we focused on those words, ach b'mei nida itchata, all the halachot that are connected to immersing utensils in a mikveh. This week, we're not going to deal with the mikveh almost at all. We may touch on it lightly for just a moment, but today we're going to talk about the flip side. So we know that when we buy utensils from a non-Jew, we studied this already last week, it must first go through a mikveh before it comes to us, even if it's never been used before. Just the fact that the purchase was transferred from someone not Jewish to someone Jewish requires that it should go through a mikveh. Today we're focusing on the other side of this, and that is what happens if the utensil that we're buying, or just the utensil that we have in front of us, has been used previously for something that is not kasher. So the classic case that you might think about is you go to the store, but it's not a regular store, it's a thrift store, it's a second-hand store, it's a garage sale in someone's yard, or whatever other context you might buy used utensils in. Put aside the issue of taking them to the mikveh. The question is, how do I take something that was previously used for non-kasher food and make it permissible for me to use in a kasher fashion? Now this inevitably will apply to situations where we wish to make our homes kasher, or we're traveling in a hotel, in an Airbnb, in a rental vacation spot, whatever it might be. We're going to come across literally hundreds of scenarios in which we may need to use a pot, a pan, an oven, a stovetop, whatever it might be, a bowl, a cup, a mug. All of those things we need to figure out, how do we use them in such a way? How do we prepare them in such a way that we're able to use them? Now, I forgot at home my box of little pots and pans that you may have seen for my Pesach videos. So today you'll have to use perhaps your imagination a little bit. And I will try to see if I have anything else here that I can use for demonstration purposes. But God willing, in the next cycle, we will have a chance to look at those little toy pots and pans. For right now, let's focus on the sources in front of us. Let's review the Mishnah from last week. Halokach keli tashmish min hagoy. Keli tashmish min hagoy. You take utensils of food use from a non-Jew. Those that need to be immersed, you immerse. Those that need to be yagil, they go through a hagalah process. Hagalah is the process of boiling. So you boil them. Laben ba'ur, those that you have to burn in the fire. Laben ba'ur, you burn in the fire. Hashipud v'haskana melabenan ba'ur. And skewers and other such things that go in the fire, you must make them kasher to the fire. Hasakin, okay, that's already like I told. Now let's look at the Gemara here. The Gemara in source 3. Let's read this in English. The sages taught, and there are obviously some filler words here that are filled in by the Steinsaltz translation, Rabbi Steinsaltz translation of the Gemara, but none of them are going to take us away from the pshat here. The sages taught, one who purchases utensils from the Gentiles must prepare them for use in the following manner. So you buy something from the Goyim. Now you want to use them. With regard to items that the non-Jew did not use, one immerses them and they are pure. So it's a brand new item, you bought it in the store. All you have to do is put it in the mikveh and vehen tehorim. I like Hebrew, what can I tell you? Devarim sheshtamesh behen al yedei tzonen, and the things that were used in a cold way, kegon kosot, uktoniot, utzochiot, all types of utensils, cups, jugs, flasks, you use them for cold drinks or foods. Madichan, you wash them well, umadbilan, and you immerse them, vehem teorin, and now they're permissible for use. Dvarim sheshtamesh behen al yedei chamin, kegon hayorot, hakumkumusin, umachame chamin, magilan, umadbilan, vehem teorin. All kinds of other things like pots, pans, things that you use in the heat, those things require hagalah, and now they are tehorin. And you hagalah, and then you take them to the mikveh, and then they are pure. Dvarim shnishtamesh behen al yedei ha'ur, and things that you use on the fire, kegon shipudim, v'askelaot, melabanan u'madbinan ve'en tehorin. And things that go in fire, the Gemara says, you must first burn them in fire, and take them to the mikveh, and then they are pure and permissible to be used. So you find here already a few different types of Hekhsher Kelim, and I'm going to list them simply. If you want to write them down, we'll enter them at length later. But for right now, there's the first object which requires no Hekhsher at all. This is an object that it's brand new. All you have to do is take it to the mikveh. Those are the items we discussed last week, tevilah. Then there are things that need hadacha. Those are things that are they were used for cold foods. We know that cold foods don't give off flavor into utensils, and because of that, all they require is to make sure they are clean. So they have to be washed, and you're able to use them. We call that in Hebrew, hadacha. Literally, to wash, to scrub them, to wash them, to make them clean. The next level is hagalah. Hagalah is something that was used with liquids, but not necessarily in the fire. So think of a pan that was put on a stove or something like that. Those things are required to be made kasher through hagalah. And then ultimately you have libun, which is fire. Things that are used actually in the fire require hekhsher in the fire. Before I go forward, let me explain to you the reason why these utensils have to go through fire, water, or washing. In the words of our Chachamim, kibolo kach poleto. The way that things have absorbed flavor, that's the way that they explete flavor. So if something had absorbed non-kasher flavor in fire, then the only way to get the non-kasher flavor out is through fire. If something absorbs non-kasher flavor through water, liquids, oil, water, then the only way to get rid of the non-kasher flavor is going to be through water. And then if there are things that really didn't absorb flavor, all they need to do is just to be clean in order to make sure that you are able to use them. This rule is another term you should write down. Kibol'o kach polto. The way that it absorbs is the way that it expletes. And in order to make something...
The temperature, does that apply to the temperature of the fire you use, for example? Or does it apply to fire full stop?
We're going to discuss that in one of the sources here. That's a very good question. We're going to discuss that together.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's just say now, we'll use generic categories. So kibolo kach polto. Anything that you want to make kasher, you have to figure out how did it become not kasher, The way that it became not kasher is the way that now you make it kasher. Moving on to source 4, the Gemara points out a seeming contradiction. וכולן שנשתמש בהן עד שלא ידביל ושלא יגיל ושלא ילבן, תנא אחד אסור ותנא אידך מותר. Regarding utensils that one used before making them kasher, there's one Tana who says that the food prepared in there is kasher, and one opinion that says the food that is prepared in them is not kasher. So you have the same situation. I went to a home where the person wasn't Jewish. I took their pot and I boiled spaghetti inside of their pot. Now that pot before was used to boil pig feet soup. Okay, it's really not kasher. Let's imagine that. Now I boiled my pasta in there. One place it says that it's kasher. Another place says that it's not kasher. So the Gemara has to understand what's the contradiction here between these two opinions. Lo kasher. It's not a problem. Ha keman damar noten tam livgam asur. Ha keman damar noten tam livgam mutar. There's a fundamental dispute between the Chachamim whether the flavor that is imparted into the food, if it's a good flavor, meaning it makes my food taste better, the food is not spoiled, then some say that for sure we say that's asur. What happens if the food that is being expleted from the pot into my pasta, it makes my pasta not taste good? So some Chachamim say it's mutar, some Chachamim say that is asur. And if you look then in source 5, Amar Rav Chiya bered Rav Huna, Rav Chiya, the son of Rav Huna, says, Lo asra Torah ela kedera bat yoma, delav noten tam livgam hu. The Torah only forbids us from using a non-kosher utensil in the day, bat yoma. Bat yoma, you may hear the term ben yomo. These are just masculine and feminine of the same term. Bat yoma, ben yomo mean, the Torah says, if this pot was used to boil pig soup, it is forbidden to be used for 24 hours. After 24 hours, mikan ve'elach lishtere. From this point on, the pot goes back to becoming completely kasher. Your pig pot becomes kasher. Your meat pot becomes parve. Your dairy pot becomes parve. Your chametz pot becomes kasher lePesach. Your kasher lePesach pot becomes neutral. Everything after 24 hours is the great reset. The reason for it is very simple. After 24 hours, the absorptions inside of the walls of the pot spoil, and they no longer become food that is giving off good flavor. And therefore, even if there is still pig absorption in the wall of your pot, if it expletes that flavor into your chicken soup, it's not a good flavor, and therefore, that not good flavor is not a problem according to halakha. And so the only time there's a biblical problem with a pot, a pan, a plate, a bowl, any other utensil you may think of, is within 24 hours. So the Gemara says, so are you telling me that after 24 hours, everything in the kitchen resets itself and it's all kasher? The Gemara says, kind of. Gezerah, our rabbis made a decree. Kedera shena bat yoma, mishum kedera bat yoma. There is a rabbinic decree that says, once 24 hours pass, the pot maintains its original status, not on a Torah level, but on a rabbinic level. The reason? Because maybe we'll come to use a pot that wasn't 24 hours old, meaning it's 23 hours old, and so our rabbis wanted to make sure that we wouldn't violate a biblical prohibition, and because of that, they made a decree that there still is a rabbinic prohibition after 24 hours to use a not kosher pot or pan. So let me summarize to you the halachot that we've learned so far. When I take a pot, a pan, a knife, a fork, a spoon, whatever was used in heat from a non-Jewish person, and I use it, if it's within 24 hours, then that is prohibited to do on a Torah level. After 24 hours, it's prohibited to do only on a rabbinic level. Why is it prohibited only on a rabbinic level? Because noten tam livgam, when bad flavor is imparted, that's no longer something that we must concern ourselves on a biblical level. The Torah did not prohibit that. And on a rabbinic level, it's only prohibited because maybe we'll come to use a pot or a pan that didn't wait 24 hours before it was used. So if I could just tell you as follows, in your kitchen, every pot and pan after 24 hours becomes parve all over again. Now I borrow the word parve, again we don't have that word in Sephardic literature, but it's not bisari, it's not chalavi, it becomes neutral. Everything in the world becomes neutral. The same works for Pesach, the same works for any other thing that you might think of. And now we're going to find ourselves dealing with Hekhsher Kelim, the kashering of utensils, and perhaps it may make sense to you when I tell people the rule, always wait 24 hours before you do Hekhsher Kelim on anything. The reason is because after 24 hours, it's not even really an issue. There's a gezerah, fine. To deal with the gezerah, we are machshir kelim. We do this hachsharat kelim. But we don't actually need to do that on a biblical level, only on a rabbinic level. So there's a Torah level and a rabbinic level. Within 24 hours, after 24 hours. After 24 hours, almost any mistake that you make in your kitchen with a meat or milk pot or pan, already the whole world becomes better. Because 24 hours later, you are no longer dealing with a Torah prohibition, only with a rabbinic prohibition. Any questions so far on anything that I just said? I obviously will elaborate on everything I said so far.
Just a question about the taste.
Of course.
Is it binary that it's either good taste or bad taste, or is neutral, like not good or not bad, also an option?
That's a neutral taste, I guess, is not really a taste. What is a neutral taste? A neutral taste means that it's not a taste.
Like, let's say it's something from a pig or whatever, but it doesn't give it bad taste. Like, I think there's like a whole, like, isn't there like a whole discussion about like certain organs that don't have a, not sure if there's a taste, like maybe gida nasha or something.
Yeah, there's even discussions about bees' legs in the honey, for example. The bees' legs, do they really give taste? And if they give taste, is it a good taste? Yeah, that's a good question. We're gonna discuss about tastes eventually here. That's a good question.
Rabbi, can you discuss metal pots that have linings such as Teflon and other linings in light of fire within 24 hours and after 24 hours, the need for having to use fire within the 24 hours or after the 24 hours for those types of pots?
Yeah. If you look, by the way, at the last few pages here, I've copied a whole chapter from my book. I will go through everything that you have in your kitchen at the end of this class, so you know exactly what to do with it. Before I go through details, I want to teach you fundamental principles. Once you have those principles, everything else in the world is going to be answered for you already. So those are all good questions. In most places, what they do is they skip the process and they just deal with the details. Do this for that, do that for this, and then everybody just has a bunch of rules that don't necessarily make sense. Here I wish to teach you an equation. You plug in all the variables into that equation, and hopefully you'll get your answer as to what it is that you need to do or not do at all. I will tell you, for the sake of transparency, that there are things that Maran writes in Shulchan Aruch when it comes to Hekhsher Kelim. I'm not certain how he reached the conclusion using the same equation that he's given us in order to do Hekhsharat Kelim, and therefore for me, I always prefer the zooming out of the equation, and the details, whoever said them will have to answer for them, and we will get there, B'ezrat Hashem. If you look on page 3, I copied here the Rambam's laws. This is the Rambam's laws of Tevinat Kelim and Hekhsher Kelim. Really what we should do is sit down and read 8 chapters here, 8 sentences, and we'll be done with the whole shiur. But why make it easy if we can make it complicated? So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll make it complicated by going to page 4. B'ezrat Hashem Dvar. Maran talks about Hekhsher Kelim in 2 different places. So there's obviously one section where he's talking about how to make utensils kasher. That's going to be in Yoreh De'ah, chapter 121. There's one other place where Maran is going to talk about Hekhsher Kelim. Tell me in which other context Maran is going to talk about making your kitchen kasher for something. Pesach, very good. Maran in the Laws of Pesach, chapter 451 of Orach Chaim, the first volume, talks about Hekhsher Kelim in the context of Pesach. I'm going to be jumping around between the laws in Yoreh De'ah for regular year-round use, and then the laws of Pesach for Pesach use. There are contradictions between the 2 chapters, and ultimately what you can attribute most of that to is that by Pesach there are stringencies because of chametz that don't exist year-round when it comes to regular kashrut, but even by Pesach they are just that. They're stringencies that are not necessarily law, and instead of getting stuck on 2 separate chapters and just trying to understand both, I'm going to focus on Tevilat Kelim, Hekhsharat Kelim, as I've organized them by topic. We'll get through all of them by jumping around different places in Shulchan Aruch, but by giving you those equations and fundamentals that you need. And let's begin, therefore, on source 6 on page 4. Maran writes, in the beginning of the laws of Hekhsher Kelim, in chapter 121 of Yoreh De'ah, Halokech Kelim Yeshanim Min Hagoy. Someone who takes old utensils, meaning used utensils from a non-Jew, Kederech shenishtamesh behen hagoy kachu hechsheran. The way the non-Jew used the utensil is the way that you make the utensil kasher. This is the same understanding of kibolo kach bolto, the rule I told you in the beginning. The way it was used is the way you make it kasher. Lefichach, and therefore, halokech kelet hashmish yishanim shenishtamesh behen bitzonen. If you purchased food utensils that were used for cold, kegon kosot, utzlochiyot, v'chayotze behen, like bowls or cups and things like that, medichan, you wash them. וצריך לשפשפן היטב במים בשעת הדחה כדי להסיר ולמרק האיסור שעל גביהן. And you have to clean them very well to make sure that the surface that has maybe residue left over from the cold non-kosher food is cleansed. ואחר כך שוטפן, then you wash them במים with water, ומטבילן, you immerse them in the mikveh, והם מותרים. And they are permissible to be used. So here you find the first case is a utensil that's used cold. Imagine that flavor only transfers through heat. And in a situation where there is no heat, then flavor has not been absorbed into the walls of the utensil. And because of that, the only thing you need to do in order to make it kasher is to wash it very well and immerse it in a mikveh, and then you are allowed to use all of those things that you bought at the garage sale. In source 8, Maran continues, Lakach mehen kelim shishtamesh behem bechamin. If you purchased utensils that were used through heat, ben shehem shel matechet, whether they are metal, o shel etz o even, or they are wood or stone, magilan, first you do hagala, you immerse them in a boiling pot of water, v'achar kach matbilan, and then you immerse them in a mikveh. Im hem shel matechet vehem mutarim, if they are metal, and then they are mutarim. What does it mean if they are metal? Because wood and stone don't require a mikveh. So after you boil them, it's already permissible to use them. The metal requires a further step. After you boil that pot, you now have to take it to a mikveh. Vim hitbilan v'achar kach higilan mutarim. And if you reverse the order, you first took it to the mikveh and then you made it kasher, it's mutar. V'yesh omrim, and there is an opinion that says shetzarich lachzor u'latbilan, that if you reverse the order, you have to do it the right way all over again. Maran does not rule that way, and so it does not make a difference which order you do it, but the original way is to do the Hekhsher Kelim first, to pass it through heat first, and then once it's kasher, to take it to the mikveh, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later in the shiur. So, we said by utensils that are used with fire, look in the Laws of Pesach and page and source 10, Kelim shemishtamshim behem al yedei ha'or, utensils that are used with fire, kegon shipudim v'askelaot v'chayotze behem, like skewers and things like that, the grates of a barbecue. Tzrichim libun, they require libun. What does the word libun mean? What's the root of that word?
Lavan, white.
Very good, white. I mean, you see metal when it heats up, yeah? Like coals, what color they turn? They turn white, yes? V'alibun hu ad shiu nitzotzot nitazin mihem. And how much do you have to do libun on them? Until it gets so hot that there are sparks coming off of the metal. Maran, there in the Laws of Pesach in section Hey, in source 11, Kelim shishtamesh behem bechamin, kefi tashmisho hekhsheran. You have to make utensils kasher the way that they were used. Im tashmishan b'Clearishon kegon kaf shemagisin bo b'kdera. If the utensil was used in a Clearishon, let's now make some order. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go get some paper goods over here so I can give you an example. I brought a few utensils that I have lying around the Beit HaKnesset. Forgive me for the lack of sophistication, but we will make do with what we have. You have a pot on the fire. This is my pot on the fire. You understand? It's a cup. So I'm not saying a shekel. This is just, we're pretending that this is a pot. Use your imagination, my friends. And you have a utensil that you use in the pot. So this pot is sitting on the fire. In halakha, this is called a Clearishon, a first utensil al ha'esh, that's sitting on the fire. Yes? That's as opposed to when you take it off the fire, it's still the Clearishon, it's just no longer sitting on the fire. So this is sitting on the stove. I now take this ladle, whatever it is, I'm mixing spaghetti in here, and I put it in there. In which way did this become not kasher? It became not kasher by sitting on a stovetop, on the fire, in a pot of water. And therefore the way to make this kasher is to take a pot, boil it with water, and immerse my ladle inside of it, and then this becomes kasher lepesach, or kasher in any other which way it becomes kasher. It is now neutral, and you could do with it what you want. Vim tashmishan b'chli sheni. What happens if I take my spaghetti and I pour it into my plate, because that's where I eat it from, and then I take my fork and I eat from my fork my spaghetti? How did this become chametz, or not kasher? In a second utensil that is not on the fire. And therefore, that's the way that I make it kasher. Hekhsher b'chli sheni. I take a pot of water, I boil it, I pour it into a second container, and I put all my utensils inside of it. And if you have a utensil that is somewhere in the middle of these two, so you have something that you use in between. So for example, I take my chamin on Shabbat, and I pour it into a serving bowl. And this serving bowl goes around the table, and everybody takes from it and puts in their plate. So this is now, how did this become not kasher? Because we poured from the fire into this utensil. So how do we make this kasher? Tzarich la'arot alav miklerishon. I must boil water and pour that water all over the utensils that were used with pouring from the fire. What's important to know here is that there is a hierarchy. The hotter something is, the more multi-purpose it has in the world of kashrut. So I can take a pot that was used on the stove with liquids, and instead of boiling it again, I can instead put it in the fire and it will become kasher. I could take my fork that I used on my plate that had food from a serving utensil, that had food from a pot, and I could put it inside of boiling hot water and that will work. But really this fork requires a minimal amount of heat in order to make it kasher. And so many of the utensils that we have in our kitchens already are the ones that are on the fire. We have those that we use in the fire. So imagine pots, pans. Then we have our ladles and spatulas and spoons and the things that we mix our food with. That's one category. Then we have another category of the utensils that we pour that hot food into. And then we have our forks, knives, and spoons that we use likely to eat out of that container, which is a very low level of heat. And therefore those are respectively libun, hagala, and we'll get to right now hadacha. What about utensils that were used with cold food? So kol hakelim, all of the utensils, afilu shel cheres, even ceramic utensils. We're going to speak about ceramic utensils in a few sources from now. Shnishtamesh behem chametz bitzonen, that you use them for cold chametz. Mutar lehishtamesh behem matzah afilu bechamin. You're allowed to use them even for hot matzah. What would be an example of hot matzah? Knedalach, matzah balls. Now, are knedalach really matzah?
If it's hot out of the oven, matzah.
If it's what?
If it's just come out of the oven.
Okay, very good. So if the matzah comes right out of the oven, okay, it's hot. But he said knedalach are not really matzah, but it's a very good example. The reason why it's a good example is because when Maran uses the word chametz or matzah, he just means foods that are kasher for Pesach and foods that are not kasher for Pesach. It doesn't actually have to be matzah. Likely, you're not going to have a hot matzah lying around for very long. Even if you're baking your own matzot, how long does your matzah stay hot? Rather, he's saying, let's say you have a bowl, and this bowl is used the whole year for your chametz breakfast cereal. And now it's Pesach morning, and you want to use that bowl for cottage cheese. I don't know, you want to have yogurt, something you want to have that's cold, that's kasher lePesach. How do you do it? As long as that bowl has been cleaned, meaning washed with water, you're able to take your matzah, your cottage cheese, your kasher lePesach food, and put it there. What if it's hot? What if chametz has only been used in that bowl? I told you breakfast cereals, only cold. And now you want to have hot food. So what's a hot food? I made myself, what hot food could I eat on Pesach morning? I made myself scrambled eggs. Very good, eggs, thank you. I take my scrambled eggs and I can put them in a chametz bowl. They're boiling hot. I could put them in a chametz bowl that was only used for cold chametz, because there is no more cold chametz in that bowl, because that cold chametz never was absorbed into the bowl. It only stayed on the surface of the bowl, and because of that, once I washed that chametz bowl, I can now use my chametz bowls on Pesach with no further Hekhsher, aside from the fact that I washed them before Pesach. And how much more?
If I use hot oatmeal.
Very good. So don't get me stuck on oatmeal for a second, because I'm sure that you all know that oats are very complicated for Pesach. But let's say use it for hot cream of wheat. Okay, let's use that. So if you use it for hot cream of wheat, then it would need a Hekhsher the way that it was used. You'd have to pour hot liquids into that bowl in order to make it kasher. Though there's an exception to that rule, which we're going to see in a few sections from right now.
Did you not just say a couple of minutes ago, according to its normal use, and if you were to generally use something with cold cereal, but once in the previous 6 months, you'd use it to make oatmeal, does it then require kashrut according to the hot methodology or to the cold?
That is a
And we thought that
fantastic...
You just said the cold would be applied.
Fantastic question. If you look here, jump with me. Why don't we do it right now? Let's look on page 10. Page 10, source 45. Why keep you in suspense? Page 10, source 45. Maran writes, in the Laws of Pesach, Kol Keli, all of the utensils, Holechin bo acharov tashmisho. We look at the majority of its use. How is it usually used? Hilkach, and therefore, Karot, bowls, af al pi shlefamim mishtamshim behem b'Clearishon al ha'esh. Even though we sometimes use it even in boiling hot in the fire. Kevan sherov tashmishan hu bi'irui shemare alehen b'Clearishon kach hu Hekhsheran. Because we usually don't put our bowls in the fire, we usually just pour hot foods into them, then the only way we need to make them kasher is by pouring hot foods, hot liquids into them. The Rama obviously says that that's not the case. The minhag in Ashkenaz is not to care. Once you use it once in a certain way, you have to kasher it that way with heat. Maran, in the 25th section of that Laws of Pesach in source 47, he writes, Kol kli hashtiyah, all kli hashtiyah, all the drinking utensils, ben selochiot, ben kosot, whether it's the plates or the cups, mutarim b'shtifa, they're all permissible by washing them. Ben shem shel zchuchit, whether they're glass, ben shem shel etz, whether they're wood, ben shem shel matechet, whether they're metal, ben shem shel cheres, whether they're ceramic. V'af al pi shlefamim notnim behem nechem cham. And even though sometimes they put hot bread on those plates, or they put hot chametz in those bowls or those cups, kevan sherov tashmishan eno ela bitzonen sagi b'shtifa. Because most of the time you only use it for cold, sagi b'shtifa, all you need is to wash it. Shelo halachu b'chol kli ela charov tashmisho. Because when our rabbis made that decree that after 24 hours something maintains its not kasher status, that only is if you're using it in the way that it's normally used. But if it's not the way that it's normally used, then the rabbis didn't institute a decree there, though the Rama writes again in source 45, Mihu yesh machmirim u'metzachim hagala v'chen nuhagim. There are those that are strict, and that is our custom, that we don't care that it's been used only once for that purpose, but once it's used that way, we no longer will just wash it and use it, we will require hagala. So this is a fundamental difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim as to which utensils require Hekhsher and which don't. Depends if it's ever been used or if it's only been used once, meaning is it its regular use or is it an irregular use of that utensil. And therefore, it could be that the bowls that you see for breakfast cereal sometimes were used with oatmeal, sometimes. But really, they're always used for cold breakfast cereals. In such a case, they only would require washing, and we would not carry over that decree of our rabbis to also require Hagala, at least not according to Maran HaShulchan Aruch.
But presumably this makes a difference if you haven't waited 24 hours, because if in the last 24 hours you have used it for hot, then you will have to use the hot kashering method.
Very good. In the 24 hours, you are correct. In the 24 hours, it's still chametz, whatever it is, it's still not kasher. And we are talking about a situation likely where we're dealing with after 24 hours. Let's look here back on utensils which may not be kasher. So, sources 13 and 14, Maran lists a few things that you cannot make kasher. One of them being pottery, earthenware, ceramic. Some of them being ivory. These are utensils that the reason why they're not allowed to be made kasher are because we're afraid that you won't do a good job at boiling them or burning them, because you might be afraid that they will break. And because of that, we don't really want our pots, our ceramic utensils to break. I came to a wedding, a Jewish wedding. They asked me to come look at something in the kitchen. I went into the kitchen and the guy's like, "Rabbi, get out of this kitchen. I don't want rabbis in my kitchen." I said, "What's the big deal with rabbis in your kitchen?" He said, "We once had a Pesach hotel." They have these things. People go away for Pesach. People are so afraid of Jewish holidays that they run away. They'll pay $50,000, $60,000 to run away from their homes because they're so afraid of observing Pesach on their own. So they run away to this hotel, and he said, "We had a rabbi here. He took a blowtorch and he blowtorched our glass cups, and he blowtorched our dishwasher, and the plastic in the dishwasher melted together. And I don't want rabbis in my kitchen." That's what the kitchen manager told me. So, here you have certain things that you can't make kasher because they would be damaged by heat, and because of that, we don't make them kasher ever. We don't take them from meat to milk. We don't make them kasher from Pesach to chametz to Pesach. There's a few more things. If you look in source 15, utensils that are made milvenim ve'afar, from bricks and dirt, those utensils have a problem because the chametz has a hard time coming out of it. Imagine your ceramic pottery that's not glazed. So don't think about your glazed mug. Imagine like the pot you have in your backyard where you plant the plants in. Now imagine putting oil in there, boiling oil in there, and then washing it out. You're likely still going to have a stain over there. There are certain utensils which simply are very difficult to remove whatever was absorbed in there, and therefore we are not machshir those kelim.
This is only when you have to apply a form of heat. If it's cold, it's okay?
If it's cold, very good. If it's cold, then it doesn't absorb at all, in which case we wouldn't be concerned about it. That's a good question.
So a ceramic knife that's used for sushi, for example, is always used cold.
You're assuming that you can kasher ceramic.
Wash it.
You're assuming you can kasher knives.
Well, you just
Knives, mechila.
Well, you just said a second ago that cold only is not the issue. So a ceramic knife that's deliberately not metallic, used for sushi, which is always cold, you would imply that if someone had used it for a fish that was not kosher at all, was washed, and then used for a fish that was kosher, within 24 hours even, would be potentially okay.
Let's pause. I'm referring to an Ashkenazi custom, not to kasher knives at all. So assuming that you can kasher a knife, then yes, there wouldn't be a problem using something cold, even a ceramic knife. There are those that are worried about what's called duchka de sakina, the pressure of the knife, that it's considered like heat and it absorbs flavor. When you find me the ceramic knife that absorbs flavors and gives off flavors, then I will change my stance that the knife would be a problem. But yes, what you said is correct.
That's the reason to use a ceramic knife, so it doesn't absorb the flavors deliberately.
Yeah, well, I agree. And therefore,
I'm trying to understand with the pot, the ceramic pot, you had previously told us that if the flavor was a bad flavor that was imparted, then it would be okay. So if you have a ceramic pot that has absorbed oil a week ago, a month ago, and now you, quote unquote, put boiling water in it, why can't you use it, since any potential flavor that has been imparted from the oil is obviously going to give this a bad flavor?
Because even though it's going to give a bad flavor, you have a rabbinic requirement to kasher that utensil. And because our rabbis were afraid that we would not sufficiently kasher our utensils that are made out of breakable materials, they didn't allow us to make those materials kasher. Your question would be a great question. So what happens if I ignored the rabbinic rule and I use that pot anyways? So then, of course, if a person would use that pot anyways, it wouldn't make the food not kasher. That's a very good point that you're bringing up. That after 24 hours, technically that pot no longer makes food kasher, but I'm not able to intentionally use it by making it kasher first because there is no method to make that kasher. Now, what I'm saying is kind of true. There are poskim who permit the kashering of ceramic, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. As you see, everything is organized by topic. We're going to get to the topic of ceramic in just a few minutes. The Rama, source 16, writes, "V'nadan shel sakinim en la takana b'hagala v'asur lachnis b'asakin." He's talking about there's like a knife protector that you can't make kasher, and therefore you're not able to use it. I see my beautiful son Elchanan on the screen. Shalom Elchanan. Thank you for learning Torah. Kashering from meat to milk. In source 17 and 18, you're going to find an Ashkenazi custom that says that it is forbidden to make something meat or dairy into parve, meaning you are not allowed to make anything kasher unless you are doing it from chametz to Pesach. But in Ashkenaz, there was a custom never to make a meat pot dairy or a dairy pot meat. I'll read to you from the Magen Avraham. Meaning from this halakha that he's referring to in the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 509, it seems that you are allowed to kasher utensils for meat and milk and vice versa. It's a famous thing by Ashkenazim when they refer to themselves. Ha'olam, the whole world. Ha'olam, the whole world prohibits this action of kashering meat to milk. And they bring it down to the name of a certain Chacham who wrote, Hatam minhag, the reason for this custom, she'im yaseh ken, that if a person constantly transfers their pots from meat to milk and milk to meat, le'olam lo yeh lo rak kli echad, he's going to have a situation where you only have one pot in your house that you use for everything. V'yagilenu kol pam shishtamesh bo v'zeh asur din maten amiti. And this is forbidden. There's maybe a person will make a mistake. Because of this, in Ashkenaz, there developed a custom, not a law, a custom that Ashkenazim never make utensils that are meat. They don't turn them into milk utensils, and they never take milk utensils and turn them into meat utensils. There's a loophole. If you look in source 18, the Mishnah Berurah brings in the second paragraph that the Khatam Sofer, who was one of the famous Ashkenazi rabbis, who was very particular in all Ashkenazi custom, he writes, the Hecha dehagil letzorach Pesach hu noheg leatir leachlif mbasar lechalav oifcha. That if you are making your utensils kasher for Pesach, and Ashkenazim permit you to make utensils kasher from chametz to Pesach, then at the same time that you make it from chametz to Pesach, you can also transition it from meat to milk or milk to meat. And therefore, Ashkenazim, according to this custom, would keep all of their pots and pans that they wanted to turn from meat to milk, and they would wait until Pesach, and when they are turning it neutral again to be able to be used for Pesach, then they can also reapply it to either meat or milk parts of their kitchen. Though, the Chida, when he heard about this, if you look at the top of page 5 in the left column, in the end of source 19, the Chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai writes, "Uvemkomotenu, in our place, nohagim lahagil klei chalav, we do this all the time, shenan b'nei oman, that are not used within the last 24 hours, lishtamesh mehem basar, we intentionally take milk utensils and turn them into meat utensils, v'chen ifcha, and the opposite is true also, v'lo chashu l'chumrot elu, and we never took into consideration these type of stringencies which have no earlier precedent in halakha." The Kaf HaChaim, who was again also a very conservative Sephardic rabbi who wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, writes from the Chida, that is the custom in the Sephardic world. If you look in source 21, Chacham Ovadia Yosef further reiterates this, that he pledges allegiance to the Chida. Many Sephardim have an affinity to the Chida, so whatever the Chida says, that's what they like to do as well. And he writes in the middle of source 21, the reason I had to explain something which is so clear, because I heard of a Sephardic rabbi who said that also Sephardim should not convert things from meat to milk or vice versa. Rather, they're only allowed to do it for Pesach. And it seems like that rabbi, for whatever reason, simply forgot momentarily those other rabbis that said that Sephardim never developed this custom. In source 22, Chacham Ovadia Yosef adds a little note at the bottom, and it says that he found the Sha'agat Aryeh was one of the famous Ashkenazi. They called him the roar of the lion after the name of his book. But they said that when he spoke, he also looked like he was roaring like a lion. Interesting story about the Shagat Aryeh. Shagat Aryeh lived in the same generation as another rabbi who wrote a book called Seder HaDorot. The two rabbis, one wrote books of Pilpul, of Ashkenazi Talmudic analysis, and then you have the Seder HaDorot, which essentially wrote a Jewish book of history, a lot of stories and telling the stories of all the different generations. They say that Shagat Aryeh, he once met the Baal HaDorot, and he was like looking down at him a little bit. You're the rabbi, you're the storytelling rabbi. And so the Seder HaDorot tells the Shagat Aryeh, tell me. It says in the Gemara that one day the Jewish people are going to forget the Torah entirely. What are you doing in order to make sure that the Jewish people don't forget the Torah? He said, listen, inevitably the Jewish people will forget the Torah. But when they see my book and the sharpness of my book and the incredible brilliance of my book, it'll reawaken in them the understanding of the Torah, and they'll learn the Torah all over again. And he said, but what about you? What is your storybook going to do? He said, my storybook will make sure that if people study the lives of the Chachamim, that they will never forget the Torah in the first place. We won't have to worry about that problem at all. The Shagat Aryeh was an Ashkenazi rabbi who said that this custom was not prevalent everywhere and that this is permissible, and that the Magen Avraham was speaking for himself, but not for all of Ashkenazi Chachamim. Rav Moshe Feinstein has another loophole in source 33, that if you sell the utensil, it's not relevant to us right now, but let's say there is an Ashkenazi custom that limits kashering all utensils from meat to milk or from milk to meat, and only permits the kashering of utensils from chametz to Pesach. But that obviously couldn't be the case, that was always the Ashkenazi custom, because if yes, why would the Rama even bother to share with us the laws of kashering utensils outside of the context of Pesach? Sources 24 and 25. Maran and the Rama mention kle'etz, kle'even, kle'matechet, that utensils of wood, stone, and bone are also able to be kashered. The Rama mentions kle'etzem, they're all able to be kashered. So it's not that they can't be kashered, they just have to be kashered the same way you would kasher metal. So if you had a wooden bowl that you wanted to make kasher for Pesach, you can make it kasher for Pesach. You just have to make it go through Hagana the same way you would kasher metal. Ceramic utensils and earthenware, Maran writes in source 26, but ceramic Hagala doesn't work. And therefore you can only use them for cold purposes, but you cannot kasher ceramic. Harav Peretz in source 27 brings an opinion that says that because this is a rabbinic decree, there are ways to be lenient, especially if there's a great financial loss. Someone inherited a very expensive set of utensils that are made out of something that cannot be kasher. There may be a way to kasher it in different ways. If that's relevant to any person, you're welcome to reach out to me privately, and I'm happy to help you through that. I wanted to bring you to the conversation surrounding glass utensils. And from glass, I wanted to take you to stainless steel. So until now, we've talked about utensils that absorb flavor, and in order to make them kasher, you have to have them give off the flavor. The question is, what about utensils that don't absorb flavor at all? Do those utensils require Hekhsher or not? In Avot de Rabbi Yonatan, our rabbis tell us, there are three qualities of glass. The first, eno bolea ve'eno polet. Glass does not absorb and does not expleat. Glass, I don't want to use the word non-porous, rather its pores don't absorb or expleat the way that other metals would. The second is you can see through glass, you can see inside of the glass. And then, glass also mimics the environment of where it is. If it's cold outside, the glass will be cold. If it's hot outside, the glass will be warm. When it comes to glass, there are essentially three different understandings of the Chachamim, how we deal with glass. I quoted from an article here by a rabbi from Yeshivat Har Etzion, who laid it out very nicely. 29.1. Glass does not absorb. Because glass does not absorb, it doesn't require Hekhsher at all. The Raviyah, the Eshkol, the Rashba, the Meiri, Maran, this is the way that they understand the halakha, that a glass cup, no matter if you use it for hot or cold, a glass plate, a glass bowl, a glass anything. If you use your glass, you went to a store and you bought glass that was used secondhand. They used to use a pig on it. You take it home, hot pig. They cook, it's a dish, they put in the oven, a glass, oven-safe glass dish. They cooked pig in there. You take it home, you wash it off, you could use it for kasher food. What kind of kasher food? Hot food. What kind of hot food? Let's say you want to eat, you want to cook some steaks in there. You can have it. Then you finish that glass utensil, you wash it out, And what can you do with it? You can now make a cheese lasagna for Shavuot inside of there. And then what else can you do? After you're done, you wash it out, and you can make your food for Pesach, all of the food for the Seder you want to make inside of that utensil, because glass does not absorb, and therefore it does not require any kind of Hekhsher aside from simply cleaning it. The second opinion?
Didn't it require the mikveh?
Yeah, of course. Yes, thank you. Like I told you, Tevilah, it does require going to the mikveh if you bought it from someone not Jewish. That's a very good point. Thank you. The second opinion is that glass absorbs, but because it's really earthenware, because glass originates in the dirt and the sand, you're not able ever to make that kasher. And the Mordechai and the Smak and Tumat Adeshen, I believe that Chabad Hasidim are of this persuasion as well, that glass, it does absorb, and not only does it absorb, but it can never be kashered because it is a earthenware utensil that cannot be kashered. Source 3.
Can I just clarify? Are we talking about all types of glass? Because there are some glasses.
I will talk about that as well.
Pyrex type glasses, yeah.
Yes, and the third source is that glass absorbs, but it's able to be kashered. The Ra'ah and the Chidushei Ritba, the Ozarua, yeah, like anything else, glass absorbs, but like anything else, it can also be kashered. Maran in source 30 rules like the first opinion. Kele zichuchit, glass utensils. Afilu machnisan lekiyum, afilu mishtamesh behem bechamin. Even if you use them for hot foods, en tzerichim shum hekhsher shenam boleim. They don't require any hekhsher at all because they do not absorb. Ushtifa be'alma sagilahu, and all you have to do is wash them, and once they're washed, those utensils are able to be used. The Rama argues in source 31, Yesh machmirin, there are those who are strict, there are those that say that even hagala doesn't work on glass, and that is the custom in Ashkenaz in these countries. The Taz in source 32, he says the rationale behind that is because glass is considered earthenware, and earthenware is not able to be kashered, but he writes, Mikol makom, nonetheless, Pashut shebedi avad eni sul klan. It's simple to him, to the Taz, that according to Ashkenazi custom, there's no prohibition of using glass without kashering it, but that the custom requires it to be kashered. So if glass was used, let's say an Ashkenazi Jew comes to a Sephardic Jew's home, and that glass was used for meat and milk, an Ashkenazi Jew is allowed to eat the food that was prepared in there, the Taz says, because it doesn't actually cause any problem, yet there is an Ashkenazi custom not to kasher glass back and forth. Harav Peretz writes in 33 in his notes on the Shulchan Aruch that's not published. Harav Peretz writes, "Uminhag Ashkenaz lahachmir v'lo muvan minhagam." The custom of the Ashkenazim is to be strict, and I do not understand their custom. It does not make sense to me. If something does not absorb flavor, then what are you concerned about? And let's talk for a moment before I get into types of glass and other chachamim that disagreed with this opinion. We are concerned about flavor being absorbed into the pot or the pan or the cup or the bowl. And if flavor is not absorbed, then what is the concern of using that utensil? So let me explain. Take a glass, someone mentioned Pyrex. So I'm now going to be brave here and I'm going to tell you that I consider all glass to be, even the ones that are different and the ones that have, later will say, no, that's not the case. The glass today has other materials mixed into it. I'm telling you now, on me, I want you to try something. Take a Pyrex dish, oven-safe Pyrex dish, and fill it up with, what's the spiciest pepper in the world right now? What are they telling you the spiciest pepper is? The most charif thing you can imagine. Tell me. Don't tell me a radish, please. A hot pepper.
Ghost pepper.
A ghost pepper. A what kind of pepper? A ghost pepper, yeah. You go buy a whole sack of ghost peppers and you chop them up. Make sure that those peppers give off all their flavor into the Pyrex dish. And you put some water on it. Make a nice stew of ghost peppers. You're making madbucha for your Yemenite friends. Yeah, now or schuk, whatever. You're going to make it hot. You put it in the oven on the highest temperature. Let it boil for as long as you want. And then take it out and wash that glass utensil out. Fill it up with just plain water. Put it back in the oven, let it cook for just as long. Take it out, and with your spoon, I want you to taste that water. And if you taste the ghost peppers in that water, then I will stand up in front of the whole Chavura and the UK and the whole world and tell them I am wrong. But I know that I'm right, and I will tell you that you will not taste even the faintest hint of a ghost pepper. And the mitziut, the fact on the ground is that glass does not absorb, nor does glass give off flavor. And you can test it because all of the utensils in your home, the glass cup that you had your tea in today, does not taste like the coffee that you drank in it yesterday. And anyone who says that I'm wrong is simply arguing with fact. This is a mitziut. I'm not a halachic issue here. This is a mitziut issue.
What about if that same experiment would work with metal?
Very good. Look at, I'm going to get there on page 9. Okay, on page 9. Another understanding of the Ashkenazi custom, because it's very difficult to accept that the Rama says glass can never be kasher. It's really a difficult thing to say. Maran in Yoreh De'ah talks about glass utensils. They don't need Hekhsher. And the Rama doesn't argue with him. And it seems to be, there are a number of Ashkenazi Acharonim, and some Sephardic ones. I believe Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, Alav Shalom, was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, B'Tzitz Eliezer. They understood that the stringency of Ashkenazim not to kasher glass, meaning have designated glass utensils for one type of food, is only relevant to Pesach. That's the only place where the Rama mentions that. But in the rest of the laws of Hekhsher Kelim, the Rama doesn't mention it. And from here we know that it's only applicable to Pesach. When I asked the old Ashkenazim of Yerushalayim, of yesterday, not today, they said that they all recall that they use same glass for meat and milk, and only by Pesach they would put away those glasses and use kasher the Pesach glasses. And so even the minhag of the Ashkenazim, as I have seen it, aside from today's reinvented Ashkenazim, the real Ashkenazim, the originals, they use glass, and I've heard about this from Mexico City, and I heard about this in all kinds of places in the world, that the glass that they didn't use was only for Pesach, but between meat and milk, B'shofi, they use glass. My father-in-law, who comes from the most Haredi families of Yerushalayim, in their kitchen had one set of glass utensils that they used for meat and milk the whole year. People weren't rich enough to have the chumrot that Jews have today. Let's just say it that way. Okay. Now there are dissenting.
Can I just unpack that for half a second? When was this Pesach written about not using glass from one to the other?
Sometime in the Rishonim, the early Ashkenazi rabbis.
So that's the point, is that was the glass at that point in time so delicate and so impossible to clean really thoroughly that it was too dangerous to even attempt to do such a thing, in which case they therefore issued Pesach at that point in time that said the glass at this point doesn't allow us to kasher it in any meaningful way, but a modern glass is a thoroughly different product to something from 1,000 years ago.
If you would like to judge those chachamim favorably in that way, I will not stand in your path. The Rambam mentions klei zechuchit and is kind of vague as to whether they need to be kashered with heat or not. Harav Kapach in source 36, he understands, no, u'le'olam din klei zechuchit kedin klei matachot hekhsheran. That glass must be kashered the same way that metal has to be kashered. Ben inyan b'dat isur, ben inyan chametz b'Pesach, whether it's non-kosher to kosher use or it's chametz to Pesach, glass has to be kashered. So this is a dissenting opinion. Rav Kapach says that the Rambam, in his eyes, is very clear that glass requires Hekhsher. Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu in source 37, also in source 38, also in source 39. Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu says that glass cannot be kashered, and that the glass today even has different materials inside of it that make it not the same glass that our Chachamim were talking about. And he says the Ben Ish Chai says, and he likes to follow the Ben Ish Chai. And when they asked him, why are you following the Ben Ish Chai against Maran? He said, no, I'm following even the Rambam. And the Rambam says the glass has to be kasher. Okay, beseda. Chacham David Shelush, he also says that glass requires Hekhsher. Chacham Vaday Yosef quotes in source 41 that in Egypt, there's in the book of Bnei Yehuda of Rabbi Yehuda Masselton, he writes that glass in Egypt, they were careful. They did not use glass between meat and milk uses. And that was the custom also in Damascus. In source 42, Rabbi Shalom Esas writes a haskama, a letter of approval onto a certain Haggadah. And in there, the Haggadah says that you can't use glass on Pesach that was used for chametz. And Rabbi Shalom Esas writes in source 42, I'm sorry, but you made a mistake. Glass does not require Hekhsher at all. And in source 43 he writes, "V'anochi lo yadati v'lo raiti minhag ze klal noheg b'Morocco." Gam etzel Gedolei Torah. He said, and you say that it's a Moroccan custom not to use glass on Pesach. I was among the greatest Chachamim in Morocco, and I never even heard of this minhag, let alone seen it. ועד היום הכל שוטפים הכלים ורוחצים אותם היטב ומשתמשים בהם וכן נוהגים. And everybody just washes glass, and that's what they do, and that is the minhag. And he says, and if you want to tell me that we should be strict like the Rama, there are many Sephardic rabbis who say that especially when it comes to Pesach or things like that, we should be strict like the Rama. He says that Pesach minhagenu lifsok kedad maran ve'en machmirim chumot moram, that we don't abandon Maran for Pesach to be strict like the Rama, rather we accept that that is the case even for Pesach. And so I would say that unless you're familiar with a community that has a different custom, the custom all among the Sephardim is that glass can be used for all uses. Among the Ashkenazim, glass can be used for all uses with the exception of Pesach. They can be particular not to use it for Pesach. When I was taking my Semicha exams with Rabbi Yehoshua Gerstein, today is my dear friend, my chavuta of many, many years. He's now the rabbi of Nachal Haredi in the Israeli army. When we were doing our Semicha exams by Harav Peretz, Harav Peretz wouldn't let us out of the exam room until we promised him that if an Ashkenazi Jew would ask, can I use glass for Chametz and Pesach for anything else, you would tell them yes. If you were willing to say yes, he was willing to fail our Semicha exam. You have to accept the mitziut, is the reality in the world is that glass simply does not absorb flavor and it does not give off flavor, and you can test this at home. And that brings me, therefore, to perhaps one of the more controversial things I'm going to discuss today, and that is on page 9. Page 9.
Is it okay if I interject here? Something similar to what was said by the previous commenter, Abraham, was that glass making during the Roman period was different than glass today. The sages back then in the Talmud said, if you want to waste your money, buy glass utensils. Because, and there's a reason for that, it's because if you go to an old art museum and you see old blown or like molded glass, they used to make glass out of just silica. It was melted sand. It wasn't as clear as glass today, and it wasn't as smooth as glass today, and it had little bits in it and inclusions in it, and it had cracks in it.
So, Pam, forgive me, just I'm going to interrupt you. In terms of this, what we're dealing with then is a machloket. It's an argument about if this is the road that everyone wants to take. You're dealing now about a machloket b'mtziut. It's an argument about reality. The reality of glass. Did glass change? Did glass not change? Is it the same glass? Is it not the same glass? All you have to do is check it out. And if you're telling me the glass of then, fine. But the glass of today, if the minhag of Ashkenaz stems from the fact the glass of yesterday was able to absorb flavor, let's pretend we're going to run down this road, then the glass of today definitely doesn't absorb flavor. And because of that, there should be no more minhag, because the minhag doesn't apply to the reality that we have in front of us today. And that's exactly what I'm going to share with you regarding stainless steel. So we talk much about metals that absorb flavors, pots, pans, and I remember sitting in my first semicha classes in Baltimore and hearing this pot absorbed the flavor of the chicken, and then it gives off the flavor into here, and then I grew up in a family where we cook a lot. And we have many types of utensils in our homes. And never in my life did I have a situation where one of our metal pots gave off flavor into the food that we're cooking inside of it right now. When it comes to stainless steel, and again, I'm not going to use the word non-porous, because everything in the world, you look at it close enough, is going to have a pore somewhere. But in terms of absorbance of flavor, and therefore imparting flavor into food, stainless steel, you can take my ghost pepper experiment that I told you about earlier with the glass, and do it with your stainless steel pot. Go to your fire, boil 1,000 ghost peppers in your pot, and then wash it out with soap and water, boil water. If you taste the ghost pepper in the water, then I'm wrong. Harav Dov Lior, in the year Tafshin Ein Gimel, wrote a very famous letter in which he suggested that stainless steel must be treated like glass, because stainless steel is as non-absorbent as glass. At that time, he signed his letter saying, because this can be perceived as a new halakha instead of the correct understanding of an existing halakha, his whole attitude is, when Maran says metal, Maran says ceramic, Maran says glass, the poskim are not talking about metal, glass, ceramic. They're talking about things that are absorbent like metal, things that are not absorbent like glass, things that are absorbent and can't be kashered like ceramic. But if the metal that we have today falls out of the metal category and goes into the glass category, then the metal we have today is considered glass. And if you want to do what Abraham and Pam were suggesting, I've been to museums here in San Diego, and you should look at the knives that they used to use 100 years ago. Those knives have visible holes inside of them. They are porous like your ceramic pot outside. But the metal that you and I use, especially I'm speaking about stainless steel does not give off flavor. Rav Dov Lior was hesitant because this can be perceived as a misreading of halakha, and he said he doesn't want to issue this letter publicly until 2 other poskim sign on with him. At that time, Harav Peretz was teaching a class in Hebron, and he told me, I spoke with Rav Dov Lior, and I told him I'm willing to be one of the rabbis to sign on with him. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Harav Peretz got up publicly, and for years he was telling us that we should treat stainless steel like glass. It doesn't need a Hekhsher. But we should never tell people that. And then we should, if someone asks the question, Rabbi, I made a cheese in my meat pot, and yet it's stainless steel, it's okay, but don't tell them it's okay. Tell them it's okay because 24 hours passed. Tell them it's okay because you don't want the meat flavor. Just tell them something else so that people don't get confused. But about 3 or 4 years ago, Harav Peretz stood up and said that he can't lie anymore to his Talmidim. He can't lie anymore to people who ask him halakha questions. And the emet is that if you scientifically check your stainless steel, what does scientifically mean? In your kitchen, you will find that the mitziut is that stainless steel does not give off flavor. And if it makes you scared, what I'm telling you right now, then you should be scared to come eat in my home. Because in my home, and now I'm sure that someone is going to make a clip out of this and send it to some rabbi to get me in trouble, that's okay, I'm not afraid. In my home, stainless steel utensils are used for meat and milk and Pesach and Chametz interchangeably. How long can you live in fantasy land? How long can a person imagine?
Is this applicable to all grades of stainless steel or any particular grade?
Abraham, every answer to that question I'm going to tell you, just take the ghost peppers and test it yourself. And with that, you will have the answer to your question. I'm not I don't own a factory of stainless steels, and I don't test grade metals, but the pots and pans that I have, Baruch Hashem, have been tested and tried and true, and I'm not afraid. I'm sure that other people will be afraid. I'm not telling you to do anything. Rather, what I'm telling you is to know this in your mind, that when it comes to stainless steel, and then if you think about the world of food production, you think about going to hotels, and you think about renting vacation rentals, and your life will become 1,000 times easier knowing that you don't have to pretend that all the things on your countertop are hiding little pig flavors inside of them. Because they're not. They're not. Especially after 24 hours, you're talking about a rabbinic law. And I'm telling you that in a reality situation, you test the reality, these don't give off flavor. And the tam ki'ikal, our rabbis have already ruled for us that when it comes to kashrut, flavor is important. I know that what I'm telling you right now.
Rabbi,
Yes.
are you suggesting then that, because I follow the same tradition that you're following with the same pots for dairy and for meat, are you suggesting that I don't need to boil them in between? That's what I'm doing. I'm boiling them in between. Are you saying that now I don't need to boil them, that I just need to wash them?
If they are stainless steel pots that do not absorb or give off flavor, yes, those stainless steel pots do not require boiling in between. Just like the glass that you use in your kitchen does not require boiling or burning in between. And I know I'm speaking to the Habura, and I can't speak in the name of the Habura. I'm certain the other Talmidei Chachamim who are part of this Habura, that they are entitled to have their opinions. What I'm sharing with you here in this Kashrut class is that we treat stainless steel exactly the way that Maran HaShulchan Aruch treats glass, without being afraid. On page 11.
And sorry, presumably if in the future we invent some high-tech ceramic and we run the same test with the peppers and we decide the ceramic doesn't appear to absorb, then that would apply to that high-tech ceramic that they invent in the future. It's not plugged off to stainless steel.
Why do you have to go to the future? I'm certain that most of the ceramic utensils you use in your kitchen, at the heat in which you use them, with the glazing that they have on them today, I'm not certain. I'm not telling you what to do with your ceramics, but test them, and you will be very surprised to see that likely they also fall. I'm telling you that in your modern kitchen, you have very few utensils that are left that absorb or give off flavors at all. That's simply the reality of food production in the world today. And so I don't have to go to the future. I'm telling you, even today, you can check out your ceramic utensils at home and tell me what you figure out about that. On section 54, Maran writes, Kli gadol, sheno yechol lachnisot ol kli acher machmat godlo. What do you do if you have to kasher your pot and it doesn't fit anymore into another pot because you don't have a pot that big? Oseh safa lefiv betit, you fill it up and you make a ceramic, use clay, you make a lip onto the pot. כדי שיתמלא היטב, so that the pot can get filled, ויגעו המים בסביבתו, and the water can reach the lip of the pot, וממלאו מים ומרתיחו, and you boil the water inside of that pot and it makes it kasher, or ייקח אבן רותחת, you take a boiling hot stone, או לפיד אש, or a fire, וישליכנו לתוכו בעודו רותח, and you throw the stone into the pot, and the water will gush over the walls of the pot, and then you have now, it makes a terrible mess, but you have overflowed your pot in your kitchen, and now it is kasher. This has developed into some people thinking that there's a custom that when you kasher your utensils, you have to throw pebbles and stones inside of your pots. I never understood why we reached that conclusion, but that's not the case. It's only if your pot is too big to be kashered, you throw the hot stone. Why hot? Why not cold? So it doesn't lower the temperature of the water. You throw a hot stone in there, and it overflows, and that pot is now considered kasher. Now, there's one section of halachot that I didn't touch today, and that is about the world of kitchens that you're in right now. If you look in section 56, I quoted to you almost an entire chapter of Maran HaShulchan Aruch. Maran writes, Noten tam nifgam mutar. If flavor that is passed off is bad, mutar. That flavor is permissible. So let's explain. Kdera shena bat yoma. A pot that was not used in the last 24 hours. Dahainu shata me'et le'et mishitbashel ba'isur. Meaning 24 hours have passed since a pig was used in it. The flavor of the pig that it gives off is bad, but nonetheless, the rabbis say, even though 24 hours have passed, you cannot use that pot. Ideally, because maybe you'll come to use a pot within 23 hours. It doesn't make a difference if it was absorbed with pig or absorbed with meat and now you want to make milk. Anything that was absorbed, the rabbis don't allow you to use it after 24 hours, even though technically you could take a meat pot that waited 24 hours and you can make macaroni and cheese inside of it, and the meat flavor that would come out of your pot after 24 hours would be pagum. Nonetheless, Chachamim still made a gezerah against that. That, though, is only true ideally. Says Maran in Halacha Vav, Stam kele goyim hem becheskat shena b'nei yoman. Your average utensil in your kitchen hasn't been used in the last 24 hours. So think about this. Your whole kitchen, when's the last time you used a pot in your kitchen? You know which ones you used yesterday, but the majority of the utensils in your kitchen, you haven't used them in the last 24 hours. And that's the case by a non-Jew's kitchen as well. They're considered pots that are not used in the last 24 hours. Therefore, if you use them without kashering them first, the food is considered kasher, because though you violated a rabbinic law, it's not enough to make your food not kasher. So food that was cooked in a not kosher pot after 24 hours, what is the status of that food? Were you allowed to cook in it? No. But what is the status of the food that you cooked in it? It's kasher. Afal piken, nonetheless, asur lomar lago, you cannot tell the non-Jew, basheli rakot b'gderatecha, make for me food in your pot, v'chen lo yomar lo aseli mirkachat, make for me food, shekol haomer basheli, hareu kilu bishel v'yadav. You can't tell a non-Jew to use his pot to make you food, because by telling him, you are telling him to ideally use his not kosher pot for you. ואפשר שלדי הרקחים מותר שכל אומנים יחדים כלים נקיים מכלמחדם, כדי שלא יפגמו אומנותם. But when it comes to buying from vendors of food things, you know that the food pots that they use are designated only for the type of food that they sell. And then Maran writes, כשם שסתם כליהם של עובדי כוכבים אינם בני אומן, כך סתם כלים שלנו בחזקת שאינם בני אומן. The same way that non-Jews' pots and pans have not been used in the last 24 hours, so too ours have not been used in the last 24 hours either. And if you jump up to Halakha Daled, Maran writes, כדרה הבלועה מבשר וחלב, a non-kosher pot. אם קודם שעבר לילה, אחד, חימו במים, חשב כאילו חזר בשל מהאיסור. Okay, this is not what I want to read to you. Here, הלכה ה' איסור מועט שנבלע בכלי שדרכו שלא להשתמש בו בהיתר מועט. A utensil that absorbed only a little bit of not kosher food. It's a big pot. It absorbed a little bit of pig. Not the whole pot worth. בכדי שייתן זה טעם בהיתר, כדי שישתמשו בו כמו קדרה גדולה וחבית וכיוצא בין, הרי זה מותר להשתמש בו לכתחילה, אף על פי שהוא בן יומו, לפי שאי אפשר לבוא לידי נתינת טעם. If you live in a situation, you have a big pot, a big chamin pot, and there was a little bit of pig that was cooked on the bottom of it. But now you're coming to make kosher chamin, and you're going to fill up that whole pot. It means that you know already that there is more kosher food in your pot than there ever was non-kosher absorption in your pot. You can ideally use that big utensil to make a lot of food, knowing that there is absorption of pig inside of that pot, because it's now already considered something that you don't have to be concerned about the halakha. When it comes to our food production scenarios, many of these halachot are very...
What was that last point? What was that last point with the big pot? The
big pot that you fill with chamin, and there's a little bit of pig that was cooked in there previously. Now it's clean, but it absorbed into the walls of the pot. You are even lechatchila allowed to use that pot to make kosher food. The reason? You will never be able to taste the pig inside of that pot because there's simply not enough pig to overpower the flavor of the chamin. And that's exactly the same halakha that I'm telling you about elsewhere, which is if the flavor, there's no way that that flavor will be imparted into your food, then like stainless steel and like glass, the food that you cook, you can do that ideally inside of the same pot, and there's nothing to be concerned about. I mean, there's precedent even in pots that can absorb flavor. But so long as the amount of flavor that are going to impart is not enough to be tasted in this huge quantity of food that you've now made, it's not that if you cooked in the pot, it's okay. You can ideally cook inside of that pot, knowing that there is a little bit of non-kasher flavor absorbed inside of it. This here ends my theoretical side of this conversation. Allow me please to have the last 10 minutes. I want to run you through a list of things that need to be kashered and how you kasher them. And then I will stick around here to talk with you about everything in the world you want to talk about. I will stay here. For me, it's only almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I have all day to sit here with you. Let me read a few excerpts from my book that I put here. If anyone needs a copy of my book and you haven't been able to afford it or get it for some reason, please send an email to marlene@shiviti.org, Shiviti, and she will make sure that we can find a way to get a copy to you. B'ezrat Hashem. In my book, Yi Shalom, there are essentially 5 steps that you have to do when kashering a utensil. The first, the utensil should be cleaned completely of any type of residue. When they ask me how clean, imagine you wanted to sell this to somebody else and you wanted it to look clean. The second, make sure that you wait 24 hours from its last use. The reason? After 24 hours, all utensils are considered kasher on a biblical level. The only prohibition is on a rabbinic level. It's much easier to deal with kashrut mess-ups when you're dealing with rabbinic prohibitions than when you are dealing with biblical prohibitions. The third, on Pesach, you should kasher your pots and pans before the time that you have to stop eating chametz. The reason being, chametz on Erev Pesach, you're allowed to eat it. In that point in time, the chametz is not considered a prohibited food. But 5 hours into the day, chametz already now becomes a problem. And it can be a problem. It's not impossible, but it could be a problem to make your chametz utensils kasher once you wait past that, I don't know if it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning. So it's better to do them earlier than that. The kashering method must be applied until the desired heat is reached. And number 5, you rinse that kashered utensil in cold water. I feel that there was a source that I put here that I didn't read to you. Did anyone see me skip Rabbi Yitzchak Abadi? There was a source from him that I quoted. Yes, forgive me. Jump with me back to source 10, source 50 on page 10. Rabbi Yitzchak Abadi was asked about modern day ovens. And Rabbi Abadi writes that you are allowed to do libun when you talk about fire. So the things that are used in the barbecue, you have to kasher them in the barbecue. But most of what we consider needing libun are things that we use with dry heat in the oven. Rabbi Abadi says you can just take those utensils and put them in the oven and turn on the oven on a high heat for about half an hour. And then the oven has now kashered all of your utensils inside of your oven that require libun. Which kind of libun? Not the libun of the fire, but the libun of the oven. The same thing might be true. I'll add for you here. I discussed this once with the of Peretz. If you've ever seen a commercial dishwasher before, do you know what I'm talking about? It's a long machine that has a conveyor belt that goes around and it washes, soaks, and then it pours boiling hot water. Utensils that need to be kashered by having boiling hot water poured on them can be kashered in such a dishwasher. I'm going to say right now, they also can be kashered in your dishwasher at home. So utensils that don't need to be boiled in a pot, but they only need to have hot water boiled on them, you can put them inside of your dishwasher at home and run a hot cycle And that hot cycle will kasher your forks and your knives and your spoons and all of those things that don't actually need to be boiled because they're not used in a pot. They can just be kashered inside of your dishwasher. And I ask that you don't put soap in there because there is a fundamental machloket whether or not the water has to be pure water or you can add soap or other things. And it's better to kasher things only with clear water. That being said, I'm going to run you through a list of things that you have in your kitchen, and I will tell you exactly how it is that they need to be kashered. And this applies to Pesach and to year-round. And remember, please, that this book was written before I told you anything about stainless steel, so some things may not be the same here. Pots. Pots on the fire require kashering on the fire, so hagala, in a pot on the fire. Frying pans. There's a machloket between frying pans. For Sephardim, frying pans are considered something that is used with a liquid. There's oil, let's say fry eggs, there's oil. Ashkenazim are concerned, what happens about the part of the pan that is not covered in liquid at that moment? And so we say the use of the frying pan is with liquids, and according to Maran, it only requires hagala. Ashkenazim would say that a frying pan requires libun. Baking pans require libun. But how do you do libun in this case? By putting them back inside of your oven and putting them on whatever the high temperature is, not self-clean, just a high temperature, and that's how you kasher them. Silverware. Silverware is normally used in a second utensil off the fire, put into there. And therefore, you really need a very low level of heat to kasher them. You could either pour hot water over them or put them in your dishwasher on a hot cycle. Serving utensils that are actually used in the pot or pan, so cooking utensils, require kashering of hagala in a boiling hot pot of water. Cups. Cups require hadacha. I'm talking about cold cups. Cups that are used for heat. If they're not glass and you wanted to, you could kasher them in other ways, but again, likely they don't require kashering at all. Skewers that use in the grill, they require libun in a grill, so in a fire. Your oven won't be good enough for that. Grills. Grills require libun, so you want to make your barbecue kasher lePesach. The difficult part about a barbecue, twofold. One, barbecues are one of the few places left in the world where people are still using cast iron. I know some of you have gotten into the cast iron cookware in your kitchen, but cast iron is absorbent material. So one, it requires thorough cleaning. You have to clean those grates well. And then it requires burning. If you manage to do that, then libun will be enough on your grill. Your oven. Your oven, as I read to you in the first class, you'll recall that Maran writes that you can cook meat and milk in the same oven. And therefore the myth that is there is a meat oven or a dairy oven is just that. It's a myth. There is no such halakha in the Shulchan Aruch. And because of that, you don't have to kasher your oven between meat and milk. On Pesach, there are those who are strict and they require libun for an oven from chametz to Pesach. It's just a chumah of Pesach. And so I tell you, clean out your oven and run a hot cycle, not a self-clean cycle. Too many houses have burned down because of self-clean cycles on Pesach. Please just put it on the highest temperature in your oven. Let it go for how long? Until it's going to burn your hand if you touch it. Don't touch it. I'm not telling you to touch it. Just if you were to touch the oven inside, it would burn your hand. That's how long it has to be kasher. Half an hour? An hour? You can figure out your own. Microwaves. Microwaves do not require kashering at all. The reason is very simple. A microwave oven, by nature of how it works, does not actually become hot inside. You can heat something in your microwave for 10 minutes. You open the microwave and you touch the wall of the microwave is not hot. And because of that, it doesn't require kashering. And even the glass plate there, the glass plate is glass. It doesn't require kashering. There are those who are strict. They are worried about the steam that's inside of the oven. So what I can tell you is that perhaps what you would want is to steam a cup of water in there. But that's already a chumah. All you have to do is make sure the microwave is clean, and a microwave does not need kashering at all. Toaster oven.
So if you're using what? Microwave doesn't need kashering?
At all. Yes.
If you're using a plastic, no, not plastic. If you're using utensils, a microwavable utensils to reheat food, does that those can get quite hot? Can you is that, do they have the same status as glass in that sense?
Give me an example. What is your microwave utensils? Not a disposable plastic. What is it?
Yeah, like I can get one. But they're like.
What is it made out of?
Is it plastic? I don't know. Maybe somebody else in the pool knows what I'm talking
They're
about.
plastic. They're plastic, and they're heated from the food that is cooked within the microwave.
Okay, are they reusable plastic?
I'm gonna get one.
So I know what you're talking about. My opinion on plastic.
No,
my opinion on plastic is that plastic is the kind of thing that has, if Abraham asked me about food grades of different grades of stainless steel, plastic comes the same way. There's plastic. I remember the plastic cups they had in the yeshiva. They smelled like whatever the guy before me drank, and if he had bad breath, you smelled the bad breath in that cup also, no matter how well you washed it. And then there's plastic that's almost mamash like glass. It stays clear, it stays clean, it doesn't get stained even by turmeric or anything else. It depends on the plastic if it's able to be kashered. Min hastam, plastic should be kashered in some type of heat fashion. So with hagala or with pouring hot water on it, depending on its use. Plastic can be kashered unless it's very high quality plastic, which doesn't give off flavor at all, in which case there's nothing to worry about. When I say a toaster oven, I'm talking about a toaster oven that looks like a miniature oven just on your countertop. That toaster oven requires to be, again, cleaned well and then turned on for half an hour or however long it takes for it to get as hot as it can. Toaster for bread.
Rabbi, can I go back to where you mentioned about microwave ovens?
Yes.
And did microwave ovens in the workplace, where they may not be cleaned, but if you were to go in, or the cleaner goes in just before you use it straight after. Putting it in plastic bags and putting your utensils, double wrapping and those sorts of things. How necessary is that?
So, I've seen different microwaves in my life. I was once in a boys' dormitory, and I went to see their microwave. And there were organisms living in that microwave. There were new creatures that have not yet been discovered that were living in that microwave. So everyone's microwave is different. Sometimes you'll notice there are some things that are more pungent than others. So if you make a bag of popcorn in a microwave, that taste actually lingers for a little bit inside of the microwave. My assumption here is like yours, that the microwave was just cleaned and there's nothing being given off into your food. In that case, if you wanted to be strict, I would just say to cover it if you wanted to keep the splatter away from anything else. But aside from that, the microwave can be used assuming that it is clean. When I say clean, I mean clean, not like there's stuff stuck to the top from the last person's food. Likely in the workplace,
double wrapping. No double wrapping is required in the set. I mean, I know you're gonna say no, but what's the reason why people will double wrap?
Oh, that's already a good question. I have a whole list of questions you should ask them. You want to know the reason? I'll give you a list of questions to ask those people when you go talk to them. For right now, toaster with bread slices. I don't even know why it's practical to kasher that for Pesach, but assuming you needed to, you would clean it out and then you would just toast it until it gets hot enough that if you would touch it, you get burned. A blender. Blender should be checked for cleanliness, and then they just need to be cleaned from any residue. There are some new blenders like Vitamixes, which you can actually boil soup in them. You leave them on for 17 minutes and they'll cook your soup. The case with that is that likely it's made out of glass and stainless steel, which doesn't require Hekhsher. But if you do have one that's plastic or you want to be machshiret, then you would just do the same thing. You would take the hot water and you would let it blend for 17 minutes until it became hot like that, and that's the way that it would be kasher. Same with food processors, coffee makers.
Rabbi, I have a question. It's Brenda.
Yes.
What about an air fryer? Say.
Don't ask me. Everyone asks me about air fryers. I don't have an air fryer. My niece called me up about her air fryer, and I don't understand for the life of me how the thing works. So I've told her that I will go to Costco just to take a look at the air fryer. But right now I can tell you that I've never actually used an air fryer, and because of that I feel bad. But I'm really not. I don't want to sound like those rabbis who say things and they don't know what they're talking about. I don't want to talk about something I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you follow up with me later in the week, I will do my best to go check out what an air fryer looks like. Coffee makers. There is nothing. Thank you. I've never in my life met a not kasher coffee, so I'm not sure why you have to kasher your coffee. But let's say you wanted to, just wash it out well. Same with the hot water urn. Same with the tea kettle. Storage jars, like where they store the little tea bag. If they wanted to kasher, just wash them out well. Plastic containers is what I mentioned before. Pressure cookers. Pressure cookers, both the cooker itself and that rubber lining require some type of hagala, unless the cooker itself is stainless steel, in which case just the rubber lining has to be put in a boiling pot of hot water. A hot plate, a plata, a blech, the things that people use on Shabbat. Sometimes food randomly will spill over it, but it does not actually require kashering. You're not ever eating off of that. If you wanted to, you could pour hot water over it if you really were inclined to. Stovetops. Stovetops are an interesting halakha. The halakha is that you don't have to kasher stovetops. Why don't you have to kasher stovetops? Because you don't eat off of your stovetops. You eat off of a pot that's on a stovetop. And for Pesach, you're not going to kasher your stovetop. Just like you don't kasher your stovetop between meat and milk, then you also don't have to kasher it between chametz and Pesach. But last time I said that, someone told me, in my house we have 2 stoves, one for meat and one for milk. Well, I don't know anymore which reality everyone lives in, but in most people's homes, I would argue that they have the same stovetops for meat and milk. And the only halakha that is relevant there is when something falls out of your pot onto the stovetop. So you're making pasta again, and the pasta falls out. You shouldn't eat the pasta that fell out, because likely it could be absorbed from whatever other flavors are there, or the residue that's there. So you should treat whatever falls out of the pot as something that you don't eat. If you really wanted to kasher your stovetop, if it's a glass stovetop, like a flat glass stovetop, it requires no kashering. Just scrub it well and clean it. If it's a metal one, you're welcome to clean it and then turn on those coils until they get hot for 15 minutes. How long does it take to get hot? 10 minutes. And in which case, your stovetop is now kasher. Knives, sinks. What about sinks? Tell me about sinks. People are always kashering their sinks. They have a meat sink and a milk sink. And if you remember class 1, I told you that you could put all your pots and pans in the same sink. That's what Shulchan Aruch says. But let's pretend you have sinks and now you want to make it kasher le Pesach. So they sell these plastic inserts that you put inside of your sinks. And the only good thing, those plastic inserts, the only thing they're good for is to collect bacteria at the bottom of your sink. Aside from that, there is no halachic purpose for kashering your sink. You don't cook in your sink. You don't eat out of your sink. Hopefully you don't eat out of your sink. And there's no situation in which you can think of that your sink is going to make your food not kasher. And if you really wanted to, you could pour hot water over your sink. Dishwashers.
And so that means it doesn't matter whether your sink is a stainless steel sink or whether it's a ceramic sink.
Correct. It doesn't matter what your sink is made out of. That's correct.
Thank you.
When it comes to dishwashers are like sinks in the sense that Maran writes that you're allowed to boil meat and milk dishes together that are dirty as long as there is soap in the water. The same halakha applies to dishwashers. You're welcome to see the 3 different opinions that I quoted there at length on your own time. If you really wanted to kasher your dishwasher, all you'd have to do, maybe run 1 cycle to clean it out with soap, and then one for Pesach, then 1 cycle to let it go clean, just to kasher itself. That would be a stringency upon a stringency. Countertops. What I'm about to tell you is in direct contradiction to what Maran Shulchan Aruch seems to say, but if you recall what I told you, that it's about categories and not about actual details. Maran Shulchan Aruch says that you have to kasher your stovetops by pouring water on top of them. Shulchanot and tevot. In Maran's world, people ate directly off of their tables and countertops. We are talking about a situation in our modern kitchen today. When's the last time that you took a boiling hot brisket out of your pot that was in the pan in the oven, and you slapped it down on your countertop directly, and then sliced that boiling hot brisket on top of your countertop, and then put it back in the pan without using a cutting board? Now, even if you did do that, even if it happened once, or randomly a spot of the juice flew onto the countertop, what are the chances that within 24 hours, you're going to, in the same exact spot on that countertop, going to drop milk or chametz or pesach or whatever it is in that same spot, and then not only you're going to drop it, but then you're going to lick it off the counter once it dropped in that spot? What are the chances? And so in our reality today, there's really no reason to kasher countertops at all, or tables. My mother-in-law, she should live and be well, kashers her countertops, and then she closes the kitchen, and she kashers her table, and then covers it with 7 tablecloths. And when I asked her why 7 tablecloths, she told me if she had 8, she would put 8 tablecloths also. But that's not actually the halakha. Mori Harav Peretz, he once came home to his house, and he saw that his wife, or somebody in his house, likely it was not his wife, covered all the countertops. They came to help grandma and grandpa with the kosher for Pesach cleaning, and they covered all the countertops with foil. And Harav Peretz asked whoever was responsible and said, did you cover the foil because of kashrut, or did you cover it with foil because you like the way it looks? And the person said, Rabbi, what's the difference? He says, if you did it for kashrut, I'm going to go rip it off the countertops right now. But if you did it because you're decorating the house, I don't get involved. You can decorate the house however you want to decorate the house. You walk into some people's kitchens for Pesach, for example, and it looks like you're in a UFO spaceship. You're all around you is covered with aluminum foil. What did they do before they had aluminum foil? What did all the chachamim do? Lo muvani. The tables, the same thing. Just make sure they're clean. Mixing bowls that are used for cold foods, the same thing is clean. Crock pot, that's an interesting question. Crock pots often are made of ceramic. If you really need to kasher your crock pot for Pesach, or you bought it at a thrift store, you're welcome to contact me privately. Rolling pins that are used for bread shouldn't be used for Pesach. It's very hard to clean them. But there are obviously ways to clean rolling pins and use them for the rest of the year. drying racks where you put your dishes. Again, you don't eat off of those drying racks. There's nothing to worry about. Chargers, which are the things, the fancy plastic plates that go under your plates that you can't eat from. You know what I'm talking about? People have them in their homes. I guess more things they want to wash. And so those chargers, you don't actually eat from them, and all you would have to do is make sure they're clean. Refrigerators and freezers. You don't eat off of the shelves of your refrigerators or your freezers. Some people like to line them. They have different shelves for meat and milk. Okay, I don't know what to tell you about that. But in terms of Pesach, for example, people line their refrigerators with paper. The only thing that can happen is you're going to disturb the airflow of your refrigerator, and your refrigerator might break or your food might spoil. But you're not getting any extra credit points in Shamayim for covering the shelves of your refrigerators. And that means that all of these utensils, if you were to bump into them in a hotel or at another person's home or anything else that might happen, that would be not a problem at all. There's a teshuvah of Rabbi Yonatan Halevy that I'm not going to do today. My time has come to end. I want to summarize what I told you today. And that is, there are things that require Hekhsher. And to remember that after 24 hours, most things are already b'di'avad okay. If they were used, they're fine. But in order to ideally use them, you have to be machshir them. Utensils that absorb and give off flavor, there are 3 categories of Hekhsher. Libun, Hagana, and Hadacha. Those are the 3 categories. There are 5 steps on how to kasher utensils, and to be aware of the different types of materials that we use, such as glass and stainless steel, that don't have any absorption or imparting a flavor at all, and therefore you don't have to concern yourself with kashering them at all. And now when it comes to visiting other people and eating in other people's homes and seeing them, perhaps the laws of kashrut will be able to bring people closer instead of bringing people farther away. Somebody asked me why I named my book Yehi Shalom. The truth, Yehi Shalom is my name. Yonatan Yaakov Halevy spells Yehi, and Shalom is my father's name. You should live and be well. But really, I believe that if we properly understood the laws of Kashrut, we would Yehi Shalom. There would be a lot of peace between people that don't trust each other and don't eat with each other and don't visit each other and don't. Everything is based on distrust, and all the pigs are hiding in all the corners of every kitchen, and every person is not reliable, and everyone is not trustworthy. And this attitude is the exact opposite of the model in which our Chachamim operated. I want to thank you for learning with me today. Tiskul mitzvot. I'm here. I'm going to stick around for as long as anyone needs me. I apologize for going a little bit over time, and God willing, I look forward to seeing you next week. Ohad, I'm handing over the chavua to you.